Everyone believed we'd be driving flying cars by 2025, and technically they were right if you live in China, or Call of Duty Black Ops 2. In fact, I think there were a ton of predictions about where we'd be by 2025, but I don't think anyone expected what would happen after. It's now 2026, and what do we have to show for it? Beautiful redhead anime women that degrade you. Life is so good. In today's video, I'm going to be teaching you everything you need to know about Laevatain, including what she does, her best build, teams, and more. My name is Braxophone, but you can call me Brax, and let's get into her. I mean, literally, the video. Let's get into the video. Of all of the characters I've covered in Endfield, Laevatain is definitely the first one. I think one of the most interesting things about Endfield is that the characters' kits and teams feel equally as important, and for that reason, I will be pulling out my credit card. Don't ask me where the $2,000 went, and don't ask me why I have 6 copies of Laevatain. There are 2 main things to know about Laevatain. The first is that she scales on intellect and strength. I love a highly intelligent woman who could literally just kill me. The other is that her kit massively benefits from heat infliction. In fact, most of her damage has to do with absorbing stacks of it. I won't do this in every video, but since the game is relatively new, class is in session. Art's reactions are where multiple elemental inflictions occur, and the second one becomes the elemental effect. If you apply one heat infliction, as seen next to this enemy's health bar, you can follow it up with a nature, electric, or cryo infliction to apply corrosion, electrification, or solidification, respectively. If you apply a second heat infliction on top of the initial one, it'll trigger an Art's burst, but if you apply a different infliction first, like the nature, cryo, or electric, your second infliction, being heat, can react to apply combustion. Now, the only things that apply inflictions are things that say that they apply inflictions, like character skills. Antal wants electric or heat infliction on that guy, Laevatain wants heat infliction on those guys, and I want a Laevatain infliction applied to me. Anyways, that's how that works. Let's actually talk about the character now. Laevatain's basic sequence is really cool, but it doesn't matter because all you're going to do with it is spam like every other character in Endfield. But there are 2 things to know about her basics. 1, they're all heat damage, meaning that characters that debuff heat on enemies or increase heat damage for allies are great synergy. And 2, she has a finisher that does crazy Insano style damage where she plunges into a staggered enemy in the same way I wish she'd plunge into me. With her first passive, it allows her to suck up all of the heat infliction on enemies every time you do your final hit in your basic combo, which gets added to the stacking icon next to your health bar called Melting Flame. This is important because it makes Laevatain even hotter. Also, this allows Laevatain to ignore heat resistance with 20% at max, which is super sick. Her skill, however, is very important. By pressing E, you can get 1 stack of Melting Flame for free, and you'll also begin to tear a hole in the ozone layer. Once you're at 4 stacks, your skill gets enhanced, where it still does its normal damage to the Climate of Talos 2, but after, it does an extra hit for Laevatillion damage. When that extra hit makes contact, Laevatain gets extra ult energy, and it gets even crazier in her ultimate. Once you activate Laevatain's ultimate, her basic attack chain changes, where the multipliers will get a massive increase, and on her 3rd hit of every chain, she'll apply a heat infliction. Also, while in her ultimate, her skill gets even further enhanced, where it can launch another basic attack sequence, but with an extra crazy hit at the end of it if you're at 4 stacks. Finally, we've created another sun. When you're in Laevatain's ult, you actually have about 15 seconds to do tricks on it, but when you use her combo skill or enhanced skill, the timer actually pauses, so you don't have to worry about losing time with those. Since Laevatain doesn't have a combo finisher in her ult, you'll lose out on some of the combo finisher benefits. This also applies to regular finishers on staggered enemies, and it's really important to hit those since it can do a lot of damage. So if an enemy gets staggered and broken, I recommend switching to another character to finish them, specifically because Laevatain can't do it while in her ult. What you technically can do though is when her enhanced skill is up, you can swap characters and use it, which will pause the timer on her ult. During the pause timer, you can fit a character's full combo in with a finisher for the SP bonus and to stagger enemies, then swap back to Laevatain. It's a higher skill tech, especially since you need to know timings, but overall it can be super beneficial if done correctly. Also, for some reason, they gave Laevatain a sustaining ability with her other passive. I mean, it's nice, but I'm assuming like all gacha games, we're eventually not going to need anything like it. But something you definitely want is her passive intellect increase that comes from befriending her. Don't be scared. The best case scenario is she completely and utterly obliterates you. Lastly, Laevatain's combo skill has a super short cooldown of 10 seconds and triggers whenever an enemy has combustion or corrosion applied to them. It deals a bunch of damage and gives 1 melting flame as well as energy, and the energy given increases based on the amount of enemies hit. The goal is for you to quickly build up 3 stacks and trigger her combo, which will grant a 4th stack, which you can follow up into an enhanced skill, which will then allow you to just Surtur it. Against multiple enemies, you can absorb heat infliction from all of them at once, which kind of lessens the need to follow a stricter rotation or necessitates that you follow a different one. I'll get into teams and synergies next, but first I want to go over her ability priorities, which will be her ultimate first, then her skill, basic attacks, and lastly, her combo skill. Make sure to pick up her passives though as well, specifically the one about absorbing heat inflictions. Endfield teams are just as important, if not more important than your build. They affect your gameplay on a fundamental level, and unfortunately, you can't just pick the cutest character ever and make it work. Laevatain excels in multi-enemy content due to being able to absorb multiple heat inflictions and spammer skill. But against bosses, you can use really cool synergies like with Wolfguard, Antal, and Ardelia. If you skill with Antal to debuff the enemy, then Wolfguard's skill to inflict heat, and follow up with Antal for the extra heat infliction copy, and Wolfguard's combo as well, you'll end up with 3 stacks of heat infliction immediately. Then when Laevatain does her finishing move, it triggers Ardelia's combo skill since all of the enemy's inflictions will be absorbed, which then applies corrosion to the enemy. That triggers Laevatain's combo skill, which gives her another stack to ultimately let her use her enhanced skill, gaining a ton of ult charge throughout all of the combo, and benefiting from the corrosion on the enemy as well as Antal's skill buffs from earlier in the fight. Wolfguard's ult can also be used to proc Laevatain's combo so long as it's off cooldown. When you're in Laevatain's ultimate, you don't have to use Wolfguard's skill since she'll apply heat infliction on her 3rd hit, but you still proc Antal and Wolfguard combos as well as Ardelia's. Laevatain is super easy to play, and though the puzzle pieces don't always fit perfectly, the synergy between these 4 characters is pretty crazy. Another character you can use instead of Wolfguard is Akekuri, since she'll give you some attack buffs, some big SP gains, the link buff, and also apply heat infliction to enemies with her skill. In calculations on paper, Akekuri technically gets higher DPS for your team with her buffs and extra SP, but in practice she feels pretty different to play since she only applies heat on skill, but more importantly, this sign can't stop me because I don't know how to read. It should be noted that Akekuri should be using 3-piece frontiers to give the whole team a 16% damage bonus when recovering SP, and if you give her Thermite Cutter, you can also give your team extra attack as well. Meanwhile, Antal and Ardelia should be using 3-piece Eternal Zeronite to buff your team with an additional 16% damage bonus whenever they apply Amp or Susceptibility. Ardelia can make enemies take more arts damage with her free signature weapon, and by giving Antal the 5-star stanza of Memorials, he can give all allies an extra 8% attack since they have different elements from him. If you're playing Wolfguard, you can build him for some damage using the Hot Work set and Aethertech gloves. Even though Wolfguard's team damage contribution is lower than Akekuri's due to Akekuri's buffs, the team that's going to do the most damage is probably the one that you'd play the best, so choose based on whatever feels more comfortable to you. I tested Angelina pretty extensively, and while she's absolutely fantastic in content with a lot of enemies, against bosses I wouldn't recommend her since she only has 1 nature infliction ability and it could be tough to inflict corrosion and trigger Laevatain's combo. It doesn't allow the team to flow as smoothly unless you group enemies and inflict heat on multiple at once for stacks, and after absorbing the heat, you'll need to inflict more to apply nature after for the corrosion debuffs, and yeah, you get the point. I'm sure we'll get more synergies at some point, but right now we have limited consistent corrosion and combustion forcers for her combo, and we're basically using completely free units that are also the best for heat infliction. So if there are any updates or if we learn anything new, I'll pin a comment, but that's kind of it for now. At the time of uploading this video, I'm pretty sure only 1 or 2 of you are unemployed enough to actually have progressed this far for level 70 gear. But either way, I want to give you guys the best build setup for Laevatain so you know what you're going for later. But first, I'll give you something to use in early game for anyone who just needs gear. Usually, you're limited by stamina and gacha games when it comes to gear, but the only limiting factor in Endfield is how long you're willing to spend in the mines for your wife. In Surtur's case, the main stats that you'll want are intellect and strength, so in the early game, I suggest taking sets like the Mordvolt Insulation set, which gives an arts bonus, and a lot of the pieces give attack percent or basic attack damage bonus, which will also affect her ultimate and ult skill. This includes Mordvolt Insulation Wrench T2, Gloves T1, and Vest T1. You can just double up on the wrench for your kit, or you can use the Aubrey Flashlight for the intellect, strength, and ult gain early on. With that said, I only really bring up the early game build because not everyone can build this next one yet. In late game and for end game, the gear set that you want to craft is the Hot Work set, the gauntlets, exoskeleton, and one Hot Work pyrometer. The body and gloves gives a heat damage dealt increase, and the kit piece gives skill damage. The whole set also has a massive bonus for her since it gives you 30 more arts intensity to increase your arts reaction damage, as well as grants her a 50% heat damage bonus after applying combustion, which she forces with her combo skill. Just be sure not to craft the T1 gloves since those can look like the correct ones based on their main stats, but they actually have a lower intellect which lowers Laevatain's attack even with the same effects. For her off piece, I recommend the Link Slab, which is absolutely crazy for her. Even though the intellect bonus isn't huge, it also gives a 20.7% main attribute bonus, which actually makes its value on intellect significantly higher since that's what Laevatain's main attribute is. You also have the option of crafting the Tide Surge set with an off piece of Hot Work gauntlets, but why would you do that in this game when all the gear costs the same amount? Seems kind of redundant to me. Anyways, all the higher tier gear isn't craftable until you get to Wuling anyways, so it'll be a minute for a lot of you, but I hope that this at least helps you understand what's good for Laevatain and that it helps you in the future. Here's a visual comparison, by the way. There's more to her build though, including weapons, so let's go over that next. One of the things that Endfield does exceptionally well is give you tons of weapon options, including free-to-play friendly ones. When it comes to weapons, obviously your best in slot is going to be the one dedicated to her, which is the Forgeborn Scathe. It grants her intellect, attack, heat damage dealt, and a massive 75% basic attack damage dealt after ulting. It's a really crazy weapon for her, but more importantly, it passes the drip check. Luckily for free-to-play players though, if you use your aura geometry to get the tier 2 battle pass, not only can you get more aura geometry back, but you can also get a 6-star weapon selector that has Umbral Torch on it. Umbral Torch is her second best in slot weapon, and it grants her a giant intellect bonus, some extra attack, and a ton more heat damage, especially after combustion or corrosion is applied. On top of that, you can get copies of this in future battle passes, meaning that you can max out its effects. Though it's not as good as her premium one, it's a free-to-play friendly option that also works on nature damage dealers and other heat sword users, and it still is pretty drippy. White Knight Nova is another weapon that's decent all around, as it gives a main attribute bonus, which is intellect, some arts intensity, arts damage, and arts damage dealt after combustion or allocation, which again, Laevatain can force on her combo skill. In case you don't know, arts damage dealt is just elemental damage, not an arts reaction. Rapid Ascent grants main attribute, crit rate, and skill and ult damage, though Laevatain's ult counts as basic attack damage, so that's worth considering. It's around Rapid Ascent and the next weapon, OBJ Edge of Lightness, where her damage begins to be way less good. At this point, it's not the weapon killing anything, it's her looks. OBJ does give heat damage dealt and attack, as well as a secondary attribute buff, but yeah, I'd recommend going for the Battle Pass weapon if you're not getting her signature. Here's a chart if you want to have a visual comparison of her best weapons. When you see a percentage on the side, it's compared to her signature weapon, so like my self-esteem, everything's going to be pretty low. For essences, it's not a super complicated thing, you just want to make sure that you get the stats of your main weapon, which you can choose in the menus. You know what's weird? Playing a gacha game where copies of characters do like nothing. I mean, not literally nothing, but like you better really like a character if you're maxing them out, because personally, I am not seeing the benefits. Okay, so obviously all of the potentials on characters are going to increase something or add an effect, and Laevatain's are all the same. Her first potential increases her skill multiplier and also returns SP on landing a hit. Her second potential gives her some intellect and basic attack damage dealt, which is a decent buff. Her third potential increases her combustion duration and damage by 50%, and her fourth is an energy cost reduction on her ult. Lastly, her fifth copy enhances her basic attacks in ult, and defeating enemies can extend Laevatain's ultimate by 1 second per up to 7 seconds. Okay, so I'm just gonna show you the gains on this, and yeah, it's kind of like whatever, right? Look, if you love red-haired women who will literally kick your face in for looking at them funny, I get it, me too. But one thing's for sure, and it's that you don't need any copies of Laevatain to make her do damage, because even with copies, the difference isn't very significant at all. So I think think that's a good thing. My derangement isn't justified anymore, though, so I guess I'll be saving. W Enfield.